a snake, dark and gleaming, emerging from Chima's lower body, from the place where his manhood should be. The serpent rose, its movements hypnotic, its scales reflecting the golden light. Obioma wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. Her eyes widened in horror as understanding crashed through her. This was the killer. Not a snake from the forest, not an evil spirit that took snake form, but Chima, the most beloved man in Long ago, in a small village called Ukoja, people lived simple, peaceful lives. The village sat nestled between rolling green hills, with a clear stream running nearby and tall trees providing shade from the hot sun. Everyone knew everyone in Ukoja. They farmed together, celebrated together, and helped each other through hard times. Each morning, women gathered at the well to fetch water, sharing stories and laughter. Men worked in the fields or practiced their trades, while children played and helped with small chores. In the evenings, families would sit outside their huts, eating together and telling stories under the stars. This was the way of life in Ukoja, simple, predictable, and peaceful. But peace, once broken, is not easily restored. It started with Amaka, a young woman known for her beautiful singing voice. One morning, she did not show up at the well. When the women went to check on her, they found her hut empty. Later that day, someone discovered her body in the village square. Amaka lay on the ground as if sleeping, her body arranged carefully, her hands folded across her chest. But the peaceful pose hid a terrifying truth. On her neck were 2 small puncture marks, like the bite of a snake. Yet no snake was found nearby. The village mourned Amaka, and life slowly returned to normal, until it happened again. This time, it was Ngozi, a young woman known for her skill in weaving baskets. She too was found in the village square with the same strange marks on her neck. Then came Ifeoma, then Obioma, then Chinyere, 5 young women, all dead within 6 months, all with the same mysterious snake bites on their necks. Fear gripped Ukoja like a cold hand. Women no longer walked alone, even in daylight. Mothers kept their daughters close, warning them of dangers unseen. At night, the once lively village became silent as everyone locked themselves in their huts, praying to be spared. Chief Obi, the village leader, called an emergency meeting. His face, usually cheerful and round, now looked drawn with worry as he addressed the villagers gathered under the large Iroko tree. "My people," he began, his deep voice carrying across the crowd, "this evil that has come to our village tests us all. I have sent our best hunters into the forest to find this killer snake, but they have found nothing." "Perhaps it is not a snake at all," suggested Namdi, the village elder whose wrinkled face spoke of many years of wisdom. "Perhaps it is an evil spirit that takes the form of a snake to attack our daughters." Murmurs spread through the crowd. An evil spirit was an explanation that made sense to many. What else could strike and vanish without a trace? "Whatever it is," Chief Obi continued, raising his hands for silence, "we must protect ourselves. No woman or girl should walk alone, especially after sunset. Men will take turns patrolling the village at night. We will fight this evil together." As the meeting ended and people dispersed, whispers filled the air. Some blamed angered ancestors. Others suspected witchcraft. A few even suggested that a jealous neighboring village had sent this curse upon them. None of them suspected the truth that walked among them daily, smiling and charming everyone it met. Standing at the edge of the gathering, watching with calm eyes, was a tall man named Chima. While worry lined the faces of everyone else in the village, his handsome face remained serene, almost amused. As the crowd thinned, he turned and walked away, whistling softly to himself. The women who passed him still smiled and greeted him warmly despite their fear. For who could suspect someone as perfect as Chima? In a village full of ordinary men, Chima stood out like a bright star in the night sky. He had come to Ukoja 5 years ago, a stranger seeking work, and had quickly made himself indispensable. Chima was a builder, and not just any builder. His hands created the most beautiful structures Ukoja had ever seen. The shrine he built for the village ancestors had such perfect proportions that people from neighboring villages came just to admire it. The hut he made for himself stood at the edge of the village, larger than most, and decorated with intricate carvings that spoke of skill beyond what Ukoja had ever known. But it wasn't just his skill that set Chima apart. It was everything about him. He stood taller than any man in the village, his shoulders broad, his body strong from years of physical labor. His skin gleamed like polished ebony in the sunlight, smooth and flawless. When he smiled, which he did often, 2 dimples appeared in his cheeks, making him look boyish despite his obvious manhood. His eyes, though, were what truly captured attention. Dark and deep, they seemed to see right through whoever he looked at, making women feel like they were the only person in the world when his gaze fell upon them. Women in Ukoja couldn't help but stare when Chima walked by. Young girls giggled behind their hands. Married women found excuses to speak with him. Even older women straightened their wrappers and touched their hair when they knew he was nearby. "Good morning, Mother Adana." Chima would greet an elderly woman struggling with a heavy load of firewood. "Those old arms must be tired. Let me carry this for you." And before she could protest, he would lift the bundle effortlessly, flashing that dimpled smile that made her feel young again. "Chima, always so helpful," she would say, unable to resist smiling back. "If only I were 40 years younger." He would laugh, the sound rich and warm. "Then all the young men would be fighting over you, and where would that leave me?" Such small kindnesses won him favor throughout Ukoja. He helped mend leaking roofs, carried heavy loads for those who struggled, and always had time to listen to people's problems. There seemed to be nothing selfish about Chima. Yet, for all his friendliness, no one truly knew him. He shared stories of distant villages and strange customs, but little about himself. When asked about family, he would smile sadly and say, "The whole village is my family now." It only made the women of Ukoja more determined to care for him. At the village well one morning, a group of young women gathered, lowering their pots into the cool water while casting glances toward where Chima worked shirtless on a new granary, his muscles gleaming with sweat. "Have you noticed how he never seems worried about the snake attacks?" whispered Nkechi, a girl of 17. "Why would he worry? He's a man," replied her friend Uzawamaka. "The snake only attacks women." "Still, you'd think he'd be concerned. Everyone else is." "Perhaps he's just brave," Uzawamaka suggested, her eyes lingering on Chima's broad back. "I wouldn't mind him protecting me from snakes." The girls dissolved into giggles, their fears momentarily forgotten in the pleasure of watching Chima work. What they didn't see was how Chima's ears seemed to catch their whispers despite the distance, how the corner of his mouth turned up in a smile that had nothing to do with warmth or kindness. When he turned to wave at them, his face showed only friendly interest, but behind his eyes lurked something cold and calculating. In the evenings, while the rest of the village huddled in fear behind locked doors, Chima would sit outside his hut, seemingly unconcerned about the danger that had the whole village terrified. Sometimes he would carve small wooden figures by the light of a lamp. Other times, he would simply stare into the darkness, as if waiting for something. If anyone had paid closer attention, they might have noticed how his eyes changed in these private moments, how they seemed to reflect light differently, the pupils narrowing to slits before returning to normal. But no one was watching Chima that closely. No one suspected that the most beloved man in Ukoja could be anything other than what he appeared to be. No one suspected that when Chima looked at the beautiful young women of the village, he wasn't seeing potential wives or companions. He was selecting his next meal. Chima's hunt always began the same way, with careful observation. He would watch the young women of Ukoja as they went about their daily tasks. The way they moved, the sound of their laughter, the glow of their skin in the sunlight. He noted which ones drew attention, which ones possessed special talents, which ones carried themselves with grace. Not just any woman would do. The hunger within him was particular. It craved beauty, vitality, something special that set a woman apart from others. The more unique she was, the more satisfying the feed. Obioma had caught his attention weeks ago. At 19, she had the most beautiful voice in Ukoja. When she sang while working in the fields, even the birds seemed to stop and listen. Her skin was the color of honey, her eyes large and expressive, her movements graceful as a dancer's. After selecting his target, Chima would begin the slow, careful process of drawing her in. There was no rush. The hunger could wait. In fact, the waiting made the final moment all the sweeter. "Obioma," he called one morning, seeing her at the well. "Your water pot looks heavy. Let me help you." She blushed, lowering her eyes shyly. "Thank you, Chima, but I can manage." "I'm sure you can," he said with a smile, his voice low and warm. "But why should you, when I'm here with two strong arms? Besides, it would be my pleasure to walk with the woman whose voice makes the sunrise more beautiful." Her blush deepened, pleasure spreading across her face at the compliment. This time she didn't resist when he lifted the water pot from her head and placed it on his own. As they walked toward her family's compound, Chima kept his voice gentle, asking about her day, her family, her dreams. He listened attentively to her answers, his eyes never leaving her face. When she spoke of hoping to sing at the next festival, he encouraged her, telling her that the ancestors themselves would be pleased to hear her voice. By the time they reached her home, Obioma was smiling freely, her initial shyness forgotten. Chima set down the water pot, his fingers briefly brushing against hers. A touch so light it might have been accidental, yet it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "Perhaps tomorrow you could sing for me?" he suggested, his voice soft, meant for her ears alone. "I'm working on some new carvings for the shrine. Your voice would make the work go faster." I would like that," Obioma replied, not meeting his eyes but unable to hide her smile. Chima left her then, not pushing for more. The seed had been planted. Now it needed time to grow. Over the next few weeks, he continued his careful pursuit. Small kindnesses, thoughtful gestures, words of admiration delivered with just the right touch of restraint. He never appeared too eager, never made her feel hunted. Instead, he made Obioma feel special, chosen, as if she had caught his attention in a way no other woman had. Other men in the village might have approached her father directly to discuss marriage, but Chima knew that the sweetest prey was the one that came willingly to the trap, believing the choice was their own. When he sensed that Obioma's interest had deepened into attraction, Chima took the next step. Walking her home one evening after she had sung for him, he paused beneath a large tree, turning to face her in the soft twilight. "Obioma," he said, his voice deeper than usual, "has anyone ever told you that your beauty goes beyond what eyes can see? It's like a light that shines from within you." She looked down, pleased but embarrassed. "You say such things, Chima." "I say what is true," he replied, gently lifting her chin with one finger so that her eyes met his. "Since you came into my life, the days seem brighter. When you sing, I hear something that touches my soul, Obioma's breath caught. No man had ever spoken to her this way. In that moment, with Chima's eyes holding hers, the fear that had gripped the village seemed distant and unimportant. "I wish," she began, then stopped, uncertain. "What do you wish?" Chima prompted softly. "I wish we could have more time together," she admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "Away from everyone's eyes and ears." Chima smiled, triumph flaring briefly in his eyes before he masked it with tenderness. "Nothing would make me happier," he said. "Tomorrow night after your family sleeps, I could meet you at the old baobab tree. We could talk all night if you wished, with only the stars to hear us." The suggestion was scandalous. Unmarried men and women did not meet alone at night. But with the village living in fear, with death seeming to lurk around every corner, the normal rules felt less important. Life might be short. Why waste it? "Yes," Obioma agreed, her heart racing. "I'll be there." As he walked away, leaving her to enter her family's compound alone, Chima allowed himself a small, cold smile. The hunt was nearly complete. Tomorrow night, the hunger would feed. Later that evening, in the privacy of his hut, Chima prepared for the feast to come. He polished his skin with scented oils, selected his finest clothes, and rehearsed the words he would use to put Obioma at ease. Every detail mattered in these final moments of the hunt. The hunger within him stirred impatiently, but Chima soothed it with promises of what was to come. Soon, very soon, it would taste the sweetness of Obioma's life force, draining it away until nothing remained but an empty shell to be discovered in the village square. Just as it had with all the others, the deadly secret night fell over Ukoja, a blanket of darkness broken only by the silver light of the moon and stars. Most villagers were locked safely in their huts, doors barred against the unknown danger that had claimed so many young women. The night patrol moved through the village, torches flickering as they searched for any sign of the mysterious killer. Obioma lay on her sleeping mat, listening to the deep breathing of her parents and younger siblings. Her heart pounded so loud she feared it might wake them. She had never done anything like this before, sneaking out at night to meet a man. But Chima wasn't just any man. When she was certain her family was asleep, Obioma rose silently. She had picked out her best wrapper earlier, hiding it under her sleeping mat. Now she changed quickly, the bright colors visible even in the dim light filtering through the small window. She pinched her cheeks to bring color to them and chewed a small piece of alligator pepper to freshen her breath. With one last look at her sleeping family, Obioma slipped out through the back of the hut, carefully avoiding the spots where the floor creaked. Outside, she pressed herself against the wall, watching for the patrol. When she saw their torches moving away toward the other side of the village, she darted from shadow to shadow until she reached the old baobab tree at the edge of Ukoja. Chima was already waiting, his tall figure leaning casually against the massive trunk. When he saw her, his face broke into that dimpled smile that made her knees weak. "You came?" he said, his voice a caress in the darkness. "I said I would," Obioma replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. Chima reached out, taking her hand in his. His touch was cool, despite the warm night, his fingers strong yet gentle as they closed around hers. "Come," he said, "not here. I have a place where we can talk without fear of the patrol finding us." He led her away from the village, toward his hut that stood alone near the forest edge. Obioma hesitated briefly, knowing that entering a man's hut alone at night crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Seeing her hesitation, Chima turned to her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Don't be afraid, Obioma. I only want to talk with you, to hear your beautiful voice without others listening. Nothing will happen that you don't wish to happen." His words reassured her, and the fact that he understood her concerns only made her trust him more. Obioma nodded and allowed him to guide her toward his dwelling. Inside Chima's hut, a small oil lamp cast a warm glow over the space. Obioma looked around with curiosity. Unlike most men's huts, which were plain and functional, Chima's home was beautiful. Intricately carved wooden figures lined small shelves. Colorful woven mats covered the floor. Strange symbols she didn't recognize were painted on one wall in red and white. "Your home is beautiful," she said, turning slowly to take it all in. "Beauty calls to beauty," Chima replied, watching her with those deep, intense eyes. He gestured for her to sit on a mat near the center of the room, then moved to a corner where he kept a small clay pot. From it, he poured a deep red liquid into 2 cups. "Palm wine," he explained, handing her one of the cups. "Sweetened with honey, the way I've heard you like it." Obioma was touched that he had remembered such a small detail about her preferences. She took a sip, the sweet liquid warming her from within, easing her nervousness. Chima sat across from her, close enough that their knees almost touched. In the lamplight, his beauty was even more striking. The sharp angles of his face softened, his eyes seeming to hold depths she could get lost in. They talked as they drank. Chima asked about her singing, about her dreams for the future. He told her stories of distant places he claimed to have visited, describing sights that made her eyes widen with wonder. His voice wrapped around her like silk, drawing her in, making her forget the strangeness of being alone with him in the middle of the night. As the palm wine loosened her tongue, Obioma found herself sharing thoughts she had never spoken aloud. Her desire to one day visit the great city she had heard about from traders. Her secret fear that she might never leave Ukoja. Her worry about the mysterious deaths that had plagued the village. "Aren't you afraid?" she asked suddenly. "The killer has only taken women so far. But what if that changes? What if you're in danger too?" Chima smiled, something flickering behind his eyes that Obioma couldn't quite read. "I've faced many dangers in my life," he said. "I learned long ago that fear is a choice. I choose not to fear what I cannot see or understand." His confidence was intoxicating. Obioma found herself moving closer to him, drawn by his strength, his certainty in an uncertain world. "I wish I could be like you," she whispered. "So brave, so sure." Chima reached out, tracing the line of her jaw with one finger. His touch sent shivers down her spine. "You are braver than you know, Obioma. You came here tonight, despite all the warnings, despite the fear that grips your village." Their faces were close now, his breath warm on her cheek. Obioma's heart raced, but no longer from fear. When Chima leaned in to kiss her, she met him halfway, her eyes closing as their lips touched. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened. Obioma felt herself melting into him, all thoughts of danger forgotten. His hands caressed her back, her shoulders, her neck. She had never been touched this way before, had never felt such a rush of sensation. When they finally parted, both breathless, Obioma saw something new in Chima's eyes, a hunger that both frightened and excited her. The palm wine had made her head spin, or perhaps it was just his presence, his touch, the newness of these feelings surging through her. "Obioma," Chima whispered, his voice lower than before, almost hypnotic. "I want to show you something I've never shown anyone else in the village." Curiosity mingled with desire. What secret could this beautiful, perfect man want to share with her? What part of himself had he kept hidden from everyone but now wished to reveal? "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft with anticipation. Chima's face grew serious, his eyes never leaving hers. "First, I must ask you a question. A strange question, perhaps, but one I need you to answer." Obioma nodded, ready to answer anything he asked. Chima leaned close, his lips nearly touching her ear, as he whispered, "Do you know the difference between a man's manhood and a snake?" The question was so unexpected, so strange, that Obioma pulled back slightly, blinking in confusion. "What do you mean?" But Chima didn't explain. Instead, he began to whistle, a soft, eerie melody unlike anything Obioma had ever heard. The sound seemed to fill the hut, to press against her skin, to sink into her very bones. It wasn't a human sound. It was something older, something that spoke to the part of her that remembered when humans lived in fear of the dark. As the whistling continued, the lamp's flame flickered, casting wild shadows on the walls. The air in the hut grew colder. Obioma tried to move, to stand, suddenly certain that something was terribly wrong, but her limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. "Chima," she whispered, fear finally breaking through the haze of desire and palm wine. "What's happening?" His only answer was to continue that terrible whistling, his eyes now fixed on hers with an intensity that held her frozen in place. And then, something moved between them. At first, Obioma thought it was a shadow, a trick of the wavering lamplight. But then she saw it clearly, a snake, dark and gleaming, emerging from Chima's lower body, from the place where his manhood should be. The serpent rose, its movements hypnotic, its scales reflecting the golden light. Obioma wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. Her eyes widened in horror as understanding crashed through her. This was the killer, not a snake from the forest, not an evil spirit that took snake form, but Chima, the most beloved man in Ukoja, and the serpent that was part of him. The snake swayed before her, its eyes black and soulless, its forked tongue tasting the air. Behind it, Chima's face had changed. The warmth was gone from his expression, replaced by cold detachment as he watched her terror grow. When the snake struck, it was too fast for Obioma to even raise her hands in defense. Fangs sank into the soft flesh of her neck, injecting venom that burned like fire through her veins. She gasped, more in shock than pain, her hand reaching up to touch the wound in disbelief. "Why?" she managed to whisper, as the venom began its deadly work, spreading numbness from her neck down through her body. Chima stopped whistling, the snake withdrawing back into him as if it had never existed. He watched her with mild interest, like a child observing an insect struggling in a puddle. "Because it is my nature," he replied simply. "Because your fear and your life force feed something in me that has hungered for centuries. Because you, with your beautiful voice and your dreams, are exactly the kind of meal that satisfies best." Obioma's vision began to darken at the edges. She tried to move, to flee, but her limbs no longer obeyed her. As paralysis spread through her body, she could only watch as Chima's face, the face she had thought so beautiful, so perfect, became the last thing she would ever see. "Don't worry," he said, his voice distant now as consciousness began to slip away from her. "I'll make sure they find you arranged beautifully in the square. Your death will feed the fear of the village, and that fear will make my next hunt even sweeter."
As life faded from Obioma's eyes, her last thought was of her family, who would wake to find her gone, who would grieve without ever knowing the truth about the monster who walked among them, a monster whose manhood was a snake. Dawn breaks over Ukoja. As women gather at the well, their hushed voices discuss the newest victim. Suddenly, they fall silent. Chima approaches, offering his sympathies with perfect charm. As he walks away, his face comes into clear view. For just a moment, his eyes shift to reptilian slits before returning to normal, and a slight smile forms on his lips. The peaceful village scene is interrupted by the arrival of a tall, confident woman at the village entrance. Unlike the fearful villagers, she walks with purpose, her hand touching a bone pendant at her neck. As her eyes scan the village, they lock onto Chima in the distance. "I found you," she whispers, last.
Please tell me, are you enjoying the story? If so, tell me what lessons have you actually learned? I would really love to hear your comments in the comment section down below. And remember to support this channel, please subscribe, like the video, comment, just say something, even a word could literally mean a whole lot. So I want you to tell me what lessons have you learned from this story. Trust me, these are situations that most people actually go through. I'm sure some of you that are watching this story have actually gone through this situation. So I want to hear from you. I want to hear how you dealt with the situation that you were faced with.
The sun had barely risen when Obioma's body was discovered in the village square. Like the others before her, she lay arranged as if in peaceful sleep, her arms at her sides, her best wrapper still bright against her now pale skin. The only sign of violence was the familiar twin puncture marks on her neck. Wailing filled the air as her family gathered around her. Her mother fell to her knees, beating her chest in grief. Her father stood silent, his face a mask of pain and fury. Villagers gathered, adding their voices to the chorus of mourning, while children were hurried away from the terrible sight. Chief Obi arrived quickly, his face grim as he ordered the body to be covered and prepared for burial. The elders gathered around him, their voices low but urgent. 6 women now, said Namdi, the oldest among them. 6 of our daughters taken by this evil. When will it end? The sacred python at the shrine has been consulted, replied another elder. The diviner says it is not a natural snake causing these deaths. It is something else, something that walks in 2 worlds. Whatever it is, Chief Obi declared, his deep voice carrying to those nearby. We must increase our vigilance. No woman leaves her compound without a male escort. The night patrols will be doubled. As the crowd slowly dispersed, a figure watched from the edge of the village. Chima, his face appropriately solemn, as befitted the tragic occasion. When villagers passed him, they nodded respectfully, some even stopping to share their grief. None noticed how his eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he watched the fear spread through Ukoja like poison in a well. Later that day, as the village was still reeling from Obioma's death, something unexpected happened. A stranger arrived in Ukoja. Women at the well were the first to spot her, a tall, slender figure walking confidently along the path that led into the village from the eastern forests. They stopped their work to watch, whispering among themselves, for visitors were rare in these troubled times. As the stranger drew closer, they saw it was a woman, and their whispers grew more intense. Who would travel alone, especially a woman, with the news of Ukoja's troubles surely having spread to neighboring villages? The stranger walked with unusual grace, her back straight, her head high. Her wrapper was of a pattern not seen in Ukoja, with bold geometric designs in deep blue and gold. Around her neck hung a single pendant on a leather cord, a small white object that caught the sunlight. Her face was striking rather than traditionally beautiful, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her in a single glance. "Greetings," she said as she approached the well, her voice melodious but firm. "I am Adana, from the village of Abanta. I seek the home of Naoma, daughter of Ekwenzi." The women exchanged glances. Naoma was known to them, an old woman who lived at the edge of the village, who kept mostly to herself, and was said to know the old ways of healing. "Naoma is her aunt," one woman whispered to another. "See the resemblance in how she holds herself." "Why come now with all the deaths?" another whispered back. "No one travels to Ukoja these days unless they must." An older woman stepped forward, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "I am Uzoamaka. Naoma's compound is at the western edge of the village, near the large Iroko tree. But be warned, stranger, Ukoja is not safe these days, especially for young women. We have had troubles." Adana's expression did not change. "I have heard of your troubles. News travels even to Abanta. But family obligation knows no fear. I must see my aunt. There was something in the way she spoke, a certainty, a calm that seemed unusual in one so young that made the women stare. Most visitors, upon hearing of the deaths, showed fear, or at least concern. Adana showed neither. I will take you, offered a young girl, no more than 12. My compound is on the way. Thank you, Adana replied with a small nod. Lead on. As they walked through the village, Adana's eyes moved constantly, taking in everything, the layout of the compounds, the people watching her pass, the paths that connected different areas. She asked her young guide questions about Ukoja, simple queries about how many people lived there, what crops they grew, how long it took to reach the nearest town market. The girl answered eagerly, pleased to be useful, until they reached a point where the path divided. Neoma's compound is down that way, she said, pointing. Just follow the path until you see the big Iroko tree. You can't miss it. Thank you for your help, Adana said, giving the girl a small smile. Return safely to your compound now. As the girl hurried away, Adana continued along the path. She had gone only a short distance when she became aware of being watched. Without turning her head, she allowed her eyes to scan her surroundings and caught a glimpse of a tall figure observing her from the shadow of a breadfruit tree. Chima had noticed the stranger immediately. Something about the way she moved had caught his attention. The confidence in her stride, the alertness in her posture, so different from the fearful women of Ukoja. He had followed at a distance, curious about this unexpected arrival in his hunting ground. When Adana reached the fork in the path, Chima emerged from his watching place and strolled toward her, as if by chance. He arranged his face in the friendly, charming smile that had won over so many in Ukoja. You must be new to our village, he called as he approached. Welcome to Ukoja. I am Chima. Adana stopped, turning to face him fully. For the first time since her arrival, something flickered across her composed features, a brief tightening around the eyes. Gone so quickly, Chima wondered if he had imagined it. Adana, she replied simply. From Abanta. Chima moved closer, using his height to full advantage as he looked down at her. Most women found his physical presence overwhelming, a combination of his stature, his handsome features, and the force of his personality. He waited for the usual signs, the quickened breath, the lowered eyes, the slight step backward. None came. Adana met his gaze directly, her eyes revealing nothing, her posture neither yielding nor challenging. It was as if she were looking at a tree or a rock, something to be noted but not something that stirred any emotion. Visiting family? Chima asked, his voice smooth as honey. We don't get many visitors these days. My aunt Neoma, Adana replied. It has been too long since I've seen her. Ah, old Neoma, Chima nodded, his smile widening. A remarkable woman. Let me walk you to her compound. The paths can be confusing for newcomers. Thank you, but I know the way, Adana said, already turning to continue her journey. The big Iroko tree, I was told. For a moment something flashed in Chima's eyes, annoyance perhaps, at being so easily dismissed, but his smile never faltered. Of course, perhaps I'll see you again during your stay. He gave a small bow. Ukoja is a small village, after all. Perhaps, Adana agreed without commitment. As she walked away, Chima watched her, his charming expression slowly fading into something colder, more calculating. There was something different about this woman, something that both intrigued and unsettled him. In all his years in Ukoja, he had never met a woman who didn't respond to his charm, until now. Adana could feel his eyes on her back as she continued down the path, but she didn't turn around. Her face remained calm, but inside, her heart beat faster than normal. So this was him, the man Nkem had described before her death. Tall, impossibly handsome, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. The same man who had appeared in their village, charmed her friend, and disappeared after her death. She had found the snake at last. When Adana reached the compound, marked by the Iroko tree, she called out a greeting. After a moment, an old woman appeared at the gate, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp and clear. "Who calls at my gate?" she asked, her voice strong despite her apparent frailty. "It is Adana, daughter of your brother Ekwensi," Adana replied formally. The old woman studied her for a long moment, then her weathered face broke into a smile. "Adana, how many years has it been? You were just a child when I last saw you." She opened the gate wider, gesturing for Adana to enter. Come in. You must be tired from your journey." Once inside the compound, with the gate securely closed, the two women embraced. Then Naom held Adana at arm's length, her shrewd eyes examining her niece carefully. "You have your father's height and your mother's eyes," she observed. "But there is something else in your face now, something that wasn't there when you were a child." "Many things have changed, Aunt," Adana said quietly. "Yes, I suspect they have." Naom led the way to her cooking hut, where a small fire burned. "Sit, eat, then you can tell me why you've really come to Ukoja." Adana raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think I haven't come simply to visit my father's sister?" Naom snorted, stirring a pot of yam porridge. "Because no woman travels alone these days, especially not to a village known for mysterious deaths. Because your eyes are too watchful for someone making a family visit, and because I know more about what happens in this world than most people think." She ladled porridge into a wooden bowl and handed it to Adana. "But first, eat, then we'll talk about the snake man you've come hunting." Adana's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "You know, component placement." "I've lived a long time, child," Naom said, lowering her voice. "Long enough to recognize evil when it walks into a village, even when it wears a handsome face and speaks with a charming tongue." Adana studied her aunt with new respect. "Then you know about Chima?" "Zrenia I cannot prove." Naom sat down heavily on a low stool. "He came to Ukoja 5 years ago. Within a year I noticed how women looked at him, how they seemed almost bewitched by his presence. It wasn't natural, but who would listen to an old woman's suspicions, especially when the man in question is so well liked, so helpful, so perfect?" She spat the last word like it tasted bad in her mouth. "The deaths began 6 months ago," Adana said. "Yes, all young women, all found with snake bites, all arranged as if sleeping." Naom's eyes narrowed. "Why have you come, Adana? What connection do you have to this evil?" For a long moment, Adana was silent, eating her porridge with measured movements. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "My friend Nkem was killed 3 months ago in Abanta, the same way snakebite, found in the village square. Before she died, she told me about a new man in her life. She described him exactly as I saw Chima today." Adana set down her empty bowl. "He was in our village for only a month. 3 women died. Then he disappeared." "And you believe he came here?" Naom finished for her. "I know he did. I've been tracking him, asking questions in villages between Abanta and Ukoja. He leaves a trail, aunt, of charm, of death, and then of absence." Naom nodded slowly. "So you've come for revenge?" "I've come for justice," Adana corrected. "Nkem was like a sister to me. We grew up together, shared everything." Her hand went to the pendant around her neck, a small white object that Naom now saw was carved from bone. "I won't let her death go unanswered. And how do you plan to bring this justice?" Naom asked cautiously. "Chima is strong, well-liked. If you accuse him without proof, No one will believe you. A small cold smile touched Adana's lips. I don't need them to believe me, Aunt. I just need to get close enough to him. Close enough for what? Instead of answering, Adana reached into her wrapper and pulled out a small white flute, no longer than her hand. It matched the pendant around her neck, carved from the same white material. Do you know what this is? She asked. Naom inhaled sharply. Snakebone, she whispered. Where did you get such a thing? From the oracle in our village. After Nkem died, I went to her, seeking answers. She told me what Chima really is. A man whose manhood can become a snake. A creature that feeds on the life force of young women. She gave me this flute and taught me how to use it. Adana's fingers caressed the smooth surface of the flute. The same whistle he uses to call forth his snake can be turned against him. With this flute, I can control the serpent, make it turn on its master. Naom stared at her niece with a mixture of awe and fear. This is dangerous magic, Adana. If you fail, I won't fail, Adana said with quiet certainty. I've prepared for this moment for months. I've tracked him across villages. I've practiced with the flute until my lips bled. I am ready. The old woman was silent for a long moment, studying Adana's face. Finally, she nodded. What do you need from me? A place to stay. Information about Chima's habits, his movements, and silence about my true purpose here. You have all three, Naom promised. But be careful, child. The snake man has lived a long time, has hunted in many villages. He has not survived this long by being careless. Neither have I, Adana replied, her eyes hard as stone. And unlike his other prey, I know exactly what he is. As night fell over Ukoja, two women planned in hushed voices in a compound at the edge of the village. And in his hut on the opposite side, Chima sat alone, thinking about the strange woman who had arrived that day. The woman whose eyes had shown no fear, no attraction, no submission. For the first time in a very long time, he felt something new, curiosity mixed with caution. The hunger within him stirred, eager for its next feast. But Chima soothed it with promises of patience. This new prey would require a different approach. Days passed, and Chima found himself thinking more and more about the stranger from Abanta. Adana moved through the village with a confidence that set her apart from the local women, who now scurried from place to place in groups, their eyes darting nervously at every sound. He had tried several times to engage her in conversation, appearing casually wherever she went, at the well when she fetched water, at the market when she shopped for her aunt, on the paths when she collected firewood. Each time she responded with polite disinterest, answering his questions with minimal words before excusing herself and continuing on her way. Her indifference both frustrated and intrigued him. The hunger within Chima, always present but usually controlled, began to focus specifically on Adana. She would be different from his usual prey, more challenging, more satisfying. The thought of her final moments, when she would realize what he truly was, when fear would finally break through that composed exterior, it made the hunger stir impatiently. You've been watching the visitor, observed Ekene, one of the village elders, as he and Chima worked together, repairing the roof of a storage hut. Chima handed him another bundle of thatch, his face carefully neutral. She's different from our women. I'm merely curious. Ekene grunted, securing the thatch in place. Different, yes. She walks without fear, that one. Some say it's unnatural, a woman being so bold in these dangerous times. What do you think? Chima asked, genuinely interested in the elder's perspective. I think she has her reasons, Ekene replied, giving Chima a sidelong glance. Everyone who comes to Ukoja these days has reasons. The question is, are they good ones? The conversation shifted to other topics, but Chima stored away the elder's words. Others had noticed Adana's unusual behavior too. He would need to be careful in his pursuit of her, to ensure that when she disappeared, as the others had, suspicion would not fall on him. That afternoon, Chima made his way to Naoma's compound, carrying a bundle of newly made tools. It was a legitimate excuse for a visit. The old woman's hoe had broken recently, and he had offered to make her a new one, but his real purpose was to observe Adana in her temporary home, to learn more about her habits and routines. "Naoma," he called at the gate, his voice warm and friendly. "I've brought your new hoe." The old woman appeared, her shrewd eyes taking in his appearance before she nodded. "Chima, come in." As he entered the compound, Chima's eyes scanned for Adana, but saw no sign of her. The disappointment must have shown on his face, for Naoma's mouth twitched with what might have been amusement. "My niece is at the stream, washing clothes," she said, taking the tools from him. "Fine work as always. You have skilled hands." "Thank you," Chima replied, smiling his most charming smile. "It's a small thing to help an elder. Your niece seems to be settling well in Ukoja." Naoma's face gave nothing away. "She is a good girl, helps an old woman with her chores without complaint." "How long will she stay?" Chima asked, keeping his tone casual. "Until she has accomplished what she came for," Naoma replied cryptically. Then, her voice sharpening. "Why do you ask, Chima? Do you have an interest in my niece?" The directness of the question caught him off guard, but he recovered quickly. "I'm always interested in newcomers to our village, especially those who arrive during such troubled times." Naoma studied him with those piercing eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "My niece is not like the other young women you know in Ukoja. She has different experiences." "What sort of experiences?" Chima couldn't help asking. "The sort that change a person," Naoma said vaguely. "Now, if there's nothing else you need, I have work to do." It was a clear dismissal. Chima thanked her for the palm wine she offered him and took his leave, his curiosity about Adana only heightened by the old woman's cryptic comments. Instead of returning to the village center, he took a roundabout path that would lead him to the stream where Naoma had said Adana was washing clothes. He told himself it was just to observe, to gather more information about this unusual woman who seemed immune to his charm. The stream gurgled peacefully as it wound its way past Ukoja, providing the village with fresh water and a place to wash clothes and bathe. Thick bushes lined the banks in many places, offering privacy for the women who came there. Chima knew the area well. It was a good place to watch without being seen. He found a spot behind a large bush that gave him a clear view of the stream. At first, he saw no one, but then movement caught his eye. Adana was there, kneeling at the water's edge, scrubbing a wrapper against a flat stone. Her own wrapper was hitched up to keep it dry, revealing long, shapely legs that gleamed with water droplets. Chima watched, fascinated. There was strength in her movements, efficiency in the way she worked the cloth against the stone. Even in this mundane task, she maintained that self-contained grace that had first caught his attention. As he observed, Adana finished washing the wrapper and wrung it out with strong hands. She laid it on a nearby rock to catch the sun, then straightened and stretched, arching her back like a cat. The movement pulled her own wrapper tight across her body, outlining firm breasts and narrow waist. The hunger stirred within Chima, more insistent now. Yes, she would be a satisfying feast indeed. Not just her beauty, which was considerable, but that strength, that independence. Breaking her would be so much more pleasurable than the easy prey he usually selected. Lost in his thoughts, Chima shifted position slightly. A twig snapped beneath his foot. A small sound, but in the quiet of the stream bank, it carried. Adana's head turned sharply toward his hiding place, her body instantly alert. There was no fear in her posture, only wariness, like a warrior sensing an enemy's approach. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady. Chima considered remaining hidden, but decided it would be better to reveal himself than to be caught spying. He stood, stepping out from behind the bush with his most disarming smile. "Forgive me," he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of harmlessness. "I was gathering herbs for a healing poultice and didn't realize anyone was at the stream." Adana's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "There are no healing herbs behind that bush," she said flatly. "Only thorn bushes and snake grass." Caught in the lie, Chima switched tactics. "You're right," he admitted, stepping closer to the water's edge. "The truth is, I saw you from the path and was intrigued. You're not like the other women in Ukoja, and that gives you the right to spy on me." There was no outrage in her voice, just cool assessment. "No," Chima conceded, moving closer still. "It was wrong of me, but you've made me curious, Adana of Abanta. Every woman I've met in Ukoja treats me with warmth, with interest. You alone seem unaffected." A small, tight smile touched Adana's lips. "Perhaps I simply have different tastes in men." The comment stung more than it should have. Chima was not accustomed to rejection, implied or otherwise. The hunger within him surged, angry now as well as eager. "Or perhaps," he suggested, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "you simply haven't given yourself the chance to know me. I could show you places around Ukoja that few know about, places of beauty and peace." "I didn't come to Ukoja for sightseeing," Adana replied, gathering up the wet wrapper. "I came to visit my aunt." "And yet you ask questions all over the village," Chima countered, watching her reaction carefully. "About the deaths, about when they started, about who might be responsible." A flicker of something, surprise, concern, crossed Adana's face before she controlled it. "My aunt says you arrived in Ukoja 5 years ago," she said, changing the subject slightly. "Where were you before that?" "Many places," Chima answered vaguely. "I've traveled far in my time." "Including Abanta?" Adana asked, her eyes steady on his face. "I may have passed through," Chima said carefully. "Many villages look the same after a while." "Strange," Adana commented, wringing out another wrapper with controlled strength. "I've lived in Abanta all my life. I don't remember seeing you there." "Perhaps you were too young to notice," Chima suggested, smiling. "Or perhaps I wasn't as memorable then as I am now." Adana straightened, looking at him directly. "Oh, I think I would have remembered you, Chima. A man like you tends to leave an impression." There was something in the way she said it, not flattery, but something harder, almost like a challenge that made Chima's smile falter slightly. For the first time, he wondered if there might be more to Adana's arrival in Ukoja than a simple family visit. Could she know something? Suspect something? Before he could pursue the thought, Adana gathered the wet laundry into a basin and balanced it expertly on her head. "My aunt will be wondering where I am," she said, turning to leave. "Enjoy your herb gathering, Chima. Be careful of snakes by the water. I hear they can be deadly in these parts." With that parting shot, she walked away, her back straight, her steps unhurried. Chima watched her go, the hunger within him now mixed with something he rarely felt, uncertainty. That night, alone in his hut, Chima paced restlessly. His encounter with Adana at the stream had left him unsettled. Her questions about Abanta, her implied knowledge of his travels, it was too specific to be coincidence. She was looking for something, or someone. But how much did she actually know? The hunger urged him to act quickly, to eliminate the potential threat. But the caution that had kept him alive for so long counseled patience. If Adana did have suspicions, acting hastily would only confirm them. No, he would need to be clever about this. He would need to change his approach, to find a way past her defenses. Every woman had weaknesses, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. He just needed to discover Adana's. As he plotted, a new plan began to form in Chima's mind. Instead of pursuing her as he had done, showcasing his charm and appeal, perhaps he should withdraw, become elusive, create a mystery that her curiosity would compel her to solve. Women like Adana, strong, independent, confident, often had a weakness for challenges. If he presented himself as one, she might come to him of her own accord. Yes, that might work. The hunter would become the hunted, at least in appearance. And when she thought she had captured her prey, he would spring the true trap. The hunger stirred approvingly at this new strategy. It could wait a little longer for its feast. After all, the sweetest meals were worth the wait. In the darkness of his hut, Chima smiled. The game had changed, but the outcome would be the same. Adana of Abanta would join the other women of Ukoja, a cold body in the village square with twin puncture marks on her neck. Only hers would be a special pleasure, a unique satisfaction. The woman who thought herself a hunter would discover, in her final moments, that she had always been prey. The next morning, when Adana went to the well to fetch water, she was surprised not to see Chima lingering nearby, as he had every day since her arrival. At the market, where he had previously found excuses to approach her, he was conspicuously absent. Throughout the day, as she moved around the village on errands for her aunt, there was no sign of the tall, handsome man who had been watching her so intently. "Strange," she commented to Naom that evening as they prepared their meal. "Chima seems to have disappeared today." Naom glanced up from the yam she was peeling. "He was at the building site all day. The new granary needs to be finished before the harvest. He's been following me for days," Adana said thoughtfully. "Now suddenly he's focused on his work. Perhaps he's finally understood that you're not interested," her aunt suggested, though her tone indicated she didn't believe this any more than Adana did. "Or perhaps he's changing his strategy," Adana mused. "He's realized his usual charm isn't working, so he's trying something new." "Be careful, child," Naom warned. "A predator is most dangerous when it changes its hunting patterns." "I'm counting on it," Adana replied, a cold determination in her voice. "Let him think he's the one in control. When the time comes, he'll discover his mistake." The next day proved similar. Adana went about her tasks, her senses alert for Chima's presence, but he remained distant. She caught glimpses of him working on the granary, surrounded by other men, or walking purposefully through the village on apparent errands. Once their eyes met across the marketplace, but instead of approaching her as he had before, he simply nodded politely and continued on his way. By the third day of this new behavior, Adana began to feel a strange sense of, was it disappointment? No, that wasn't right. It was anticipation, she decided. She was waiting for his next move, curious to see how long he would maintain this pretense of disinterest. On the fourth day, as she was returning from collecting medicinal herbs for Naom, Adana rounded a corner and nearly collided with Chima, who was walking in the opposite direction. "Forgive me," he said, stepping back. "I wasn't watching where I was going." Adana studied him, noting the careful neutrality of his expression. No charming smile, no intense gaze trying to capture hers. He seemed almost distant. "No harm done," she replied. Then, curious to see his reaction, "I haven't seen you around the village much lately." A small shrug. "The granary must be finished before the rains come. Chief Obi has me working from sunrise to sunset." "I see." Adana adjusted the basket of herbs on her hip. "Well, don't let me keep you from your work." She made to pass him, but Chima spoke again, his voice casual. "I'm going to the sacred grove tomorrow at dawn. There's a tree there that produces the best wood for carving, strong but flexible. I need some for the granary doors." It was the first time he had volunteered information without trying to engage her further. Adana raised an eyebrow, waiting for the invitation she was sure would follow, but it didn't come. Chima simply nodded a farewell and continued on his way, leaving Adana standing in the path, slightly off balance from this unexpected encounter. As she walked back to Naoma's compound, Adana turned the brief meeting over in her mind. Chima was clearly implementing a new strategy, becoming elusive, creating situations where he seemed to share information accidentally rather than deliberately, making himself interesting without appearing to try. It was clever, she had to admit. Had she been an ordinary woman, it might even have worked. The mystery of his sudden withdrawal would have piqued her curiosity, made her wonder what had changed, perhaps even made her seek him out. But Adana was not an ordinary woman, and her interest in Chima had nothing to do with attraction. She was hunting him, just as surely as he was hunting her. That night, as she lay on her sleeping mat, listening to Naoma's soft snores, Adana considered her next move. Chima's mention of the sacred grove had been deliberate, an invitation without seeming to be one. Should she go, it would mean meeting him. Alone, away from the village. Dangerous, certainly, but also an opportunity to learn more about him, to get closer to her goal. The flute lay hidden beneath her sleeping mat, cool against her fingers as she reached down to touch it. The oracle had taught her how to use it, had made her practice until the specific notes and rhythms were embedded in her muscle memory. But would it be enough against a creature that had survived for who knew how long, preying on women across countless villages? Adana closed her eyes, picturing Nkem's face, her bright smile, her kind eyes, her boundless enthusiasm for life. All of it ended by the monster who now set traps for Adana. Yes, she would go to the sacred grove, not because Chima wanted her to, but because each interaction brought her one step closer to justice for Nkem, one step closer to ending the terror that had claimed so many young women. With that decision made, Adana finally drifted into sleep, her dreams filled with snakes and whistling and the sound of her friends' laughter, cut tragically short. Dawn came with a thin mist rising from the ground, giving the village an otherworldly appearance as Adana slipped quietly from Naoma's compound. She had told her aunt of her plan the night before, ignoring the old woman's concerns. "At least take this," Naoma had insisted, pressing a small leather pouch into Adana's hand. "Herbs that will cloud his mind if you manage to get them into his food or drink. Not enough to kill, but enough to slow him if you need to escape." The pouch now hung around Adana's neck, alongside her bone pendant, hidden beneath her wrapper. The flute was secured at her waist, easily accessible but out of sight. She moved silently through the sleeping village, alert for any sign of the night patrol or early risers who might question her destination. The sacred grove lay just beyond the village boundary, a small cluster of ancient trees that had been revered by the people of Ukoja for generations. It was said that the spirits of ancestors dwelled there, protecting the village from harm. Adana couldn't help but note the irony. If the grove truly held protective spirits, they had failed to save the 6 young women who had died in the past 6 months. As she approached the grove, the mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like ghostly fingers. The air felt cooler here, and strangely still, as if time moved differently among these ancient giants. Adana paused at the edge, her senses alert for any sign of Chima. At first, she saw nothing. The grove appeared empty, the only sounds the occasional call of a morning bird and the soft drip of dew from leaves. Then, movement caught her eye. A tall figure emerging from behind a massive tree trunk, his outline blurred by the mist. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Chima said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet grove. Adana stepped forward, careful to maintain a safe distance. "I was curious about this special wood you mentioned. My father was a carver. He taught me to appreciate different woods for different purposes." It was the first personal detail she had shared with him, and she saw his interest sharpen at this small offering. "Your father taught you well then," Chima replied, gesturing toward the tree behind him. "This is it, the Iroko with the red heart. See how the trunk divides into 3 main branches? That's rare, and it makes the wood grain unique." Adana moved closer to examine the tree, genuinely interested despite herself. The trunk did indeed split into 3 thick branches about halfway up, creating an unusual shape against the lightening sky. "The wood from this type of Iroko is special," Chima continued, his voice taking on a quality Adana hadn't heard before, not seductive or charming, but genuinely enthusiastic. "It holds fine detail better than any other wood I've worked with, and the color, a deep red that seems to glow from within when polished." He reached up to touch the bark, his movements graceful and sure. "I found this grove when I first came to Ukoja. The villagers considered it sacred, but rarely visited. I asked permission from Chief Obi's father to harvest small branches occasionally for special projects." As he spoke, Adana watched him carefully. There was something different about Chima in this moment, a passion for his craft that seemed genuine, not part of the carefully constructed persona he showed to the village. It was almost as if, in this sacred space, surrounded by ancient trees, some small part of his true self emerged. The observation was valuable. Even predators had aspects of themselves they cared about, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Chima's connection to his carving, to this grove, it was information she could potentially use. "Why did you really ask me to come here?" Adana said abruptly, cutting through the pretense. "It wasn't to show me a special tree." Chima turned to her, surprise flickering across his face before he composed it again. "Direct, aren't you?" Most women in Ukoja would have played along with the pretext, enjoyed the game. "I'm not most women," Adana replied evenly. "And you didn't answer my question." For a long moment, Chima studied her, his eyes unreadable in the dim light filtered through mist and leaves. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to carry some genuine emotion, weariness perhaps, or resignation. "I wanted to apologize," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "For my behavior at the stream, for following you around the village. It was disrespectful." Of all the things Adana had expected him to say, an apology was not among them. She regarded him skeptically, waiting for the manipulation that must surely follow. "You're right to be suspicious," Chima continued, reading her expression accurately. "Men don't change their ways so easily, I know. But seeing you these past days, your strength, your independence, it made me realize how predictable I've become. How I've been playing the same game for so long that I've forgotten there might be other ways to connect with people." It was a masterful performance. The hesitation, the self-deprecation, the implied admiration of her character, rather than just her appearance, all calculated to appeal to a woman like Adana, to make her feel seen and respected, rather than merely desired. Had she not known what he truly was? Had she not come to Ukoja specifically to hunt him, Adana might even have been moved by the apparent sincerity in his voice. "That's quite a realization," she said neutrally. "What brought it on?" Chima leaned against the Iroko tree, his posture deliberately casual, but his eyes never leaving her face. "You did. Your refusal to respond to my usual approach made me look at myself, at how I interact with women. It wasn't comfortable." He ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, a gesture that appeared self-conscious, but was likely just as calculated as everything else about him. "I've relied on my looks, my charm, for so long that I've never had to develop deeper qualities, never had to be truly vulnerable with anyone." Adana almost wanted to laugh at the irony. Here was a predator, a killer who had taken the lives of countless women, pretending to have a moment of self-awareness about his shallowness with women. The performance was so perfect, so precisely targeted to appeal to her specifically, that it would have been admirable if it weren't so deadly in its intent. "And now you want to start with me?" she asked, allowing a hint of skepticism to show. "Why?" "Because you're different," Chima replied promptly. "Because you see through the surface charm that works on everyone else. Because—" He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Because I think you might be worth the effort of becoming something more than what I've been." It was exactly what a woman like Adana, strong, independent, unimpressed by superficial charm, would want to hear. The recognition of her value, the implication that she alone had inspired a desire for genuine change, the subtle flattery of being considered special. Adana allowed her expression to soften slightly, giving Chima the reaction he was so clearly seeking. Let him think his new strategy was working. Let him believe she was starting to lower her guard. "That's unexpected," she said, injecting a note of uncertainty into her voice. "But I'm only in Ukoja temporarily. I'll return to Abanta once my visit with my aunt is complete." "I understand," Chima nodded, maintaining the performance of a man trying to be respectful of boundaries. "I'm not asking for anything, just a chance to know you better before you leave. As friends, perhaps?" "Friends." The word hung in the air between them, its innocence belied by the hunger that Adana could sense beneath Chima's controlled exterior. He was changing tactics, yes, but the goal remained the same: to get her alone, to make her trust him, to feed on her life force as he had done with so many others. "Friends?" Adana repeated, as if considering the concept. "That might be possible." The smile that spread across Chima's face appeared genuine in its pleasure, though Adana knew better than to trust any emotion he displayed. "Good," he said, pushing away from the tree. "Then perhaps you'll join me for an evening meal tomorrow. Nothing formal, just food and conversation at my hut." And there it was, the invitation she had been expecting, the true purpose behind this entire performance of vulnerability and self-awareness. He was still trying to get her alone in his space, where he had killed so many others. Adana hesitated, as if considering the offer. This was moving faster than she had anticipated. Was she ready for a direct confrontation? The flute pressed against her side beneath her wrapper, a reminder of her purpose. "I'm not sure my aunt would approve," she said, buying time. "She's quite traditional about unmarried women visiting men's huts alone." "Of course," Chima agreed smoothly. "I respect such traditions. Perhaps we could meet at the old shrine instead. It's quiet there, but still public enough to be proper." Adana knew the place he mentioned, a small abandoned shrine at the eastern edge of the village. Once used for offerings to lesser spirits, it had been replaced by a newer shrine closer to the village center. Now it stood empty most days, partially hidden by vegetation, but still maintaining a sacred aura that kept villagers from dismantling it. It would be isolated enough for his purposes, yet public enough to seem like a respectful suggestion. Clever. The old shrine would be acceptable, she agreed, watching his reaction carefully. Something flickered in Chima's eyes, triumph, perhaps, quickly masked by a more appropriate, pleased expression. Tomorrow evening, then, after the day's work is done but before darkness falls completely. I'll be there, Adana promised, already planning how she would prepare for this encounter. As they walked back to the village together, maintaining a respectable distance, Adana felt a strange mix of emotions. Anticipation, certainly the hunt was progressing toward its inevitable conclusion, but also a grudging admiration for Chima's skill at manipulation. Had she been any other woman, his new approach might well have succeeded where his initial charm offensive had failed. It was almost a pity that such intelligence, such adaptability, was paired with such evil. In another life, Chima might have been someone worthy of genuine admiration. Instead, he was a predator who needed to be stopped before more women fell victim to his deadly secret. When they reached the edge of the village, Chima gave her a respectful nod and turned toward the granary construction site. Adana watched him go, noting how several women they passed followed him with their eyes, their faces lighting up when he offered a friendly greeting. None of them knew his manhood was a snake. None of them suspected the charming, helpful Chima was responsible for the deaths that had terrorized their village. But Adana knew, and tomorrow, if all went as planned, the snake would strike for the last time.
As night falls, Adana prepares for the confrontation, securing the bone flute at her waist. Naoma grips her arm. Be careful, child. No one who has faced him knowing his true nature has ever survived. Meanwhile, at his hut, Chima prepares differently. He polishes his skin with oils, but his reflection in water shows reptilian eyes. He whispers to his reflection, "Tonight he will feed again. But this one will be special." The snake within him stirs visibly beneath his skin. Unlike with other victims, Chima doesn't soothe it. "Yes," he whispers, "she knows what we are. Her fear will taste like nothing we've ever known." As Adana approaches the shrine in the darkness, we see Chima already waiting, his back to her. When he turns, his smile is different, predatory, inhuman. "Do you know the difference between a man's manhood and a snake?" he asks, beginning to whistle an otherworldly melody. Adana reaches for her flute, but suddenly freezes. Something is wrong. The flute isn't at her waist. It's gone.
If you made it to the end of part 2 of this thrilling story, then all I can say is congratulations and thank you. These videos really take a lot of time to make. But you guys' support really keep me going. Comments below and share this video with your friends and family. Also, like and subscribe to the channel so that you'll be the first to be notified when I drop a new video.
Adana's heart thundered in her chest as her fingers searched frantically for the flute. Chima's whistling grew louder, more insistent, as the fabric of his tunic began to shift and bulge. For one terrible moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. Then her fingers brushed against something smooth and cool, the bone flute, which had slipped lower in her wrapper during her approach to the shrine. Relief flooded through her, but she kept her expression frozen in fear, allowing Chima to believe he had the advantage. As his whistling reached its peak, she slowly drew the flute from its hiding place, her movements hidden by the folds of her wrapper. When Chima's eyes glowed with triumph, certain of his prey's helplessness, Adana raised the flute to her lips and began to play.
The day passed slowly for Adana, each hour dragging as she prepared herself mentally and physically for the evening ahead. She went about her usual tasks, helping Naoma with household chores, fetching water, visiting the market, but her mind was focused on what was to come. "You're sure about this?" Naoma asked as they sorted herbs together in the afternoon shade. "Meeting him alone is dangerous, even at the old shrine." "I'm sure," Adana replied, her fingers methodically separating dried leaves from stems. "This is why I came to Ukoja, to face him, to end the killings." The old woman sighed, her weathered face creased with worry. I've lived long enough to know that revenge often costs more than expected. Be careful that in hunting this monster, you don't become something you'll later regret. Adana paused, looking up at her aunt. This isn't just about revenge, it's about justice. It's about protecting other women from suffering Nkem's fate. I know, child, Naoma said softly. Just remember that even justice can blind us if we pursue it too single-mindedly. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Adana prepared herself. She bathed in the small enclosure behind Naoma's cooking hut, scrubbing her skin until it glowed. From her traveling bundle, she took out the one item of beauty she had allowed herself to bring on this journey, a small pot of palm oil mixed with fragrant herbs. She rubbed it into her skin, knowing that the pleasant scent would help maintain the illusion that she was a woman going to meet a man she was beginning to trust. The bone flute was secured at her waist, hidden but easily accessible. The pouch of herbs Naoma had given her hung around her neck alongside her pendant. She chose her wrapper carefully, not her best, which might suggest special effort, but not her everyday one either. A middle choice, appropriate for a casual meal with a friend, which was the pretense of this meeting. If I'm not back by full darkness, send word to Chief Obi, Adana instructed Naoma as she prepared to leave. Tell him to bring men to the old shrine. May the ancestors watch over you, the old woman said, her voice thick with emotion. May they guide your hands and protect your spirit. Adana embraced her aunt briefly, then turned and walked out of the compound, her pace unhurried despite the significance of her destination. As she moved through the village, she nodded greetings to those she passed, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. No one looking at her would guess that she was walking deliberately toward a confrontation with a predator who had killed countless women across multiple villages. The old shrine stood in a small clearing at the eastern edge of Ukoja, partially obscured by vegetation that had grown up around it over the years. Once, it had been an important sacred site, but newer shrines had been built closer to the village center, and this one had gradually been abandoned. Only the lingering sense of its sacred purpose had prevented it from being dismantled for materials or reclaimed completely by the forest. As Adana approached, she saw that efforts had been made to prepare the space for their meeting. The area immediately around the shrine had been cleared of overgrowth, and someone Chima obviously had swept the stone platform clean. A woven mat had been laid out, and upon it sat a clay pot, 2 cups, and a covered dish that likely contained food. Chima himself was arranging everything with careful attention to detail, his back to her as he worked. He wore a clean tunic, his normally bare head covered with a cap made from the same material. The overall effect was one of respectful preparation, a man making an effort to receive a guest properly, but without the romantic overtones that might have come with more elaborate arrangements. Adana paused at the edge of the clearing, taking a moment to compose herself. This was it, the culmination of months of planning, of tracking, of waiting. Whatever happened next would determine whether justice would be served for Nkem and all the other women who had died at Chima's hands. Her movement must have caught his attention, for Chima turned, his face breaking into that now familiar smile when he saw her. "Adana," he called, his voice warm with welcome. "You came." "I said I would," she replied, stepping into the clearing. "Many people say many things," Chima observed, gesturing for her to join him on the mat. "But you, I'm learning, are a woman of your word." Adana moved forward, careful to maintain awareness of her surroundings, of the distance between them, of the flute secured at her waist. She sat on the edge of the mat, arranging her wrapper modestly around her legs. "I've brought palm wine," Chima said, lifting the clay pot. And yam porridge with dried fish. Simple food, but good. Thank you, Adana said, watching as he filled a cup and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, a touch that might have seemed accidental, but which Adana knew was deliberate on his part. Testing boundaries, establishing physical connection, beginning the slow process of seduction that had worked so effectively on his previous victims. Chima filled his own cup, then raised it in a small salute. To new friendships, he said, his eyes holding hers over the rim of the cup. To new understandings, Adana replied, taking a small sip of the wine. It was good, sweet and smooth, with none of the harshness that came from poor fermentation. Chima clearly knew his palm wine. As for whether it might be drugged, Adana doubted it. That wasn't his method. He preferred his victims aware, conscious of what was happening in those final moments when his true nature was revealed. You said your father was a carver, Chima said, serving portions of the yam porridge onto flat wooden plates. Is he still living? No, Adana replied truthfully. He died 3 seasons ago. Fever took him quickly. I'm sorry for your loss, Chima said, his voice carrying what seemed like genuine sympathy. My own father died when I was young. I barely remember him. Another piece of personal information, offered as if in exchange for hers. Building connection, establishing common ground. Adana wondered how much of it was true. What about your mother? She asked, taking a bite of the porridge. Like the wine, it was good, richly flavored with herbs and spices that complemented the fish. Also gone, Chima said, his expression somber. Long ago. So you've been alone for much of your life? Adana observed. Yes. A small, sad smile. Perhaps that's why I've never truly connected with anyone. Why I've kept my relationships superficial. It was all part of the performance, the suggestion of loneliness, of a man shaped by early loss, of someone who might be redeemed by the right connection, designed to appeal to a woman's nurturing instincts, to create sympathy rather than suspicion. They ate in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the distant calls of birds settling for the night and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle evening breeze. The sun had sunk lower, casting long shadows across the clearing and bathing everything in golden light. Tell me about Abanta, Chima said eventually. What is life like there? Much like Ukoja, Adana replied, setting down her empty plate. Farming, trading, the rhythm of seasons. We're known for our cloth dyeing. The women of Abanta create patterns that traders seek from far away. And did you learn this skill, the dyeing of cloth? Adana nodded. My mother taught me, but I preferred helping my father with his carving. He said I had a good eye for detail, for seeing the shape waiting inside the wood. This was true, one of the few genuine pieces of herself that Adana was willing to share with Chima. Let him think he was getting to know the real Adana. Let him believe his strategy of building friendship was working. I would like to see your work sometime, Chima said, refilling their cups with palm wine. Perhaps before you return to Abanta. Perhaps, Adana agreed, non-committally. Though I haven't carved in some time, not since... She let her voice trail off, as if caught in a painful memory she hadn't meant to reveal. Chima leaned forward slightly, interest sharpening his features. Not since what? Adana looked away, her expression carefully composed to suggest someone struggling with whether to share something painful. Not since my friend died, she said finally, her voice soft but clear. It was difficult. She used to sit with me while I carved, singing or telling stories. I'm sorry, Chima said, reaching out to touch her hand briefly. Was this recently? Zrenya. 3 months ago, Adana replied, allowing a hint of genuine grief to show. This was dangerous ground. Offering too much truth could alert Chima to her real purpose in Ukoja, but a complete fabrication might ring false. "What happened to her?" he asked, his voice gentle with apparent concern. Adana met his eyes directly. "She was killed, found in our village square with strange bite marks on her neck, like the women here in Ukoja." Something flickered in Chima's eyes. Awareness, recognition, perhaps even a trace of concern before he masked it with an expression of sympathetic horror. "How terrible," he said. "No wonder you've been asking questions about our troubles here. The similarities must be disturbing." "Very," Adana agreed, watching him carefully, "especially since the deaths in our village stopped as suddenly as they began, after only 3 victims. Perhaps whatever was responsible moved on," Chima suggested, his voice neutral. "Perhaps," Adana echoed. "Or perhaps it was stopped." A tension had entered the air between them, subtle but unmistakable. The pretense of a casual meal between new friends had shifted into something else, a careful dance around the truth that both knew but neither acknowledged openly. The sun had almost set now, the golden light deepening to orange and red. Soon it would be dark, the brief period of twilight giving way to night. If Chima planned to make his move tonight, it would be soon. As if reading her thoughts, he set down his cup and moved slightly closer to her on the mat. "It's getting dark," he observed. "I should walk you back to your aunt's compound soon." "There's still some light left," Adana replied, not wanting to leave before she had accomplished what she came for. "And the night patrol hasn't even begun their rounds yet." Chima smiled, pleased by her apparent willingness to extend their time together. "Then we have a few more minutes," he agreed. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you, Adana." "What's that?" she asked, her hand casually moving closer to where the flute was secured at her waist. His eyes tracked the movement briefly before returning to her face. "What do you hope to find here in Ukoja? Really?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. There was no charm in it, no manipulation, just a straightforward query that cut through the layers of pretense they had both been maintaining. "I told you," she replied carefully. "I came to visit my aunt, and to ask questions about deaths that resemble your friends," Chima added, "to watch me with eyes that see too much, to resist every attempt I make to charm you, until suddenly you agree to meet me alone at dusk." There it was, the dropping of the mask, the acknowledgement that he knew she wasn't what she pretended to be. The game had shifted again, and Adana would need to adjust quickly. "You're interesting to me," she said, offering a half-truth. "Different from the men in Abanta. Is it so strange that I would want to know you better?" "Yes," Chima replied simply. "It is strange, because you're different too, Adana of Abanta. You're not like other women who come under my spell so easily. You're hunting something, or someone." The last light of day was fading rapidly now, the clearing growing dimmer by the moment. Adana could feel the tension building, the air between them charged with unspoken knowledge and imminent danger. "And what about you, Chima of Ukoja?" she countered, her fingers now resting on the hidden flute. "What are you hunting when you charm the young women of this village, when you speak sweet words and make them feel special, chosen?" A slow smile spread across his face, not the charming one he showed to the village, but something older, colder, more genuine in its predatory nature. "Clever Adana," he said softly. "So you do know something of me. I wondered if you might." "I know enough," she replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I know about the women, about how they die, about what you really are." Chima leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "And what am I? Adana of Abanta. What do you think you know about me?" The moment had come. Adana's hand closed around the flute, ready to draw it out at the first sign of his transformation. But first, she needed him to reveal himself, to confirm beyond any doubt what she already knew to be true. "I know that you're not human," she said clearly. "Not entirely. I know that when you take a woman to your bed. You ask her a question about the difference between a man's manhood and a snake, and then you whistle, and she sees the truth before she dies." Something changed in Chima's face as a ripple beneath the skin, as if the human mask he wore was momentarily disturbed by what lay beneath. His pupils narrowed briefly to vertical slits before expanding again to human roundness. "You know a great deal for someone who has never been to my bed," he said, his voice deeper now, with a sibilant quality that hadn't been there before. "Tell me, how did you come by this knowledge? Who has spoken of things meant to remain secret?" "No one living," Adana replied truthfully. "But the dead speak in their own way, if you know how to listen." Darkness had fallen completely now, the clearing illuminated only by the faint light of stars and a moon not yet risen. In this dimness, Chima seemed to change, not physically, but in the energy he projected. The pleasant facade fell away entirely, revealing the predator that had always lurked beneath. "So you came to Ukoja for revenge," he said, putting the pieces together. "For your dead friend. How touching." "Not just revenge," Adana corrected, slowly rising to her feet as Chima did the same. "Justice, an end to the killings." Chima laughed, a sound unlike any human laugh, rich with dark amusement and ancient knowledge. "Justice? For something you cannot possibly understand? I am older than this village, Adana. Older than the kingdom itself. What I am, what I do, it is beyond your human concepts of right and wrong." "Try me," Adana challenged, now standing her full height, the flute gripped tightly in her hand, though still concealed by her wrapper. "Help me understand why innocent women must die to feed your hunger." For a moment, Chima seemed almost intrigued by her courage, by her willingness to face him even knowing what he was. "You are extraordinary," he said, circling her slowly. "In all my years, I have never met a woman like you. Strong, fearless, aware." He moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper near her ear. "You would have made a magnificent feast. The fear of ordinary women is sweet, but yours would have been exquisite, because you understand exactly what is happening. The flavor of fear is always richer when it comes from knowledge rather than confusion." Adana didn't flinch away, though every instinct screamed at her to run. Instead, she turned her head to meet his gaze. "You speak as if you've already failed," she observed, "as if I'm already beyond your reach." Chima's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous for a human mouth. "Oh, you misunderstand, brave Adana. I simply appreciate what might have been. But make no mistake, you will feed me tonight as surely as all the others did." He stepped back slightly, his eyes now fully transformed, vertical pupils set in irises that glowed faintly in the darkness. "Shall we complete the ritual? I believe you know how it begins." And then, with exaggerated courtesy, as if inviting her to dance rather than to die, he asked, "Do you know the difference between a man's manhood and a snake?" The question hung in the air between them, ancient and terrible in its simplicity. Adana had known it was coming, had prepared for this moment for months, yet still felt a chill run down her spine as the words left Chima's lips. But she was ready. As Chima began to whistle, that eerie, otherworldly melody that called forth the snake, Adana's hand moved swiftly from beneath her wrapper, bringing the bone flute to her lips. Chima's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the instrument. White bone carved with symbols of binding and control, ancient magic made physical. Before he could react, Adana began to play, her fingers moving across the holes with practiced precision, producing a counter-melody that cut through his whistling like a knife through cloth. The effect was immediate. Chima's whistling faltered, his body freezing in an awkward position, as if caught between one movement and the next. The transformation that had begun, the subtle shifting beneath his skin, the elongation of his jaw halted abruptly. "What have you done?" he managed to gasp, the words clearly difficult to form. Adana continued playing, moving in a slow circle around him, maintaining the melody that held him immobile. Only when she had completed the circle did she pause briefly to speak. "The oracle in Abanta gave me this flute," she explained, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "Carved from the bone of a python that lived 100 years. She taught me the melody that controls your kind, the notes that bind the snake within you, that prevent it from answering your call." Rage and disbelief warred in Chima's eyes as he struggled against the invisible bonds that held him. "Impossible," he hissed. "No human has known that melody for centuries. The knowledge died with the last true oracle of the eastern forests." "Clearly not," Adana replied, bringing the flute back to her lips. She resumed playing, the haunting notes filling the clearing with power older than either of them. As she played, she watched Chima carefully, noting how his struggles gradually weakened, how his eyes dulled from bright rage to sullen acceptance. The flute's magic was working, constraining not just his physical movement, but the very essence of what he was, the snake that lived within him, that emerged during his deadly feeding. When she judged him fully contained, Adana circled back to face him directly. She lowered the flute again, though her fingers remained poised to resume playing at the slightest sign of resistance. "Now," she said, her voice hard as stone, "we will talk, and you will answer my questions, truthfully, or I will resume playing until your ears bleed from the sound." Chima glared at her, hatred burning in his inhuman eyes, but nodded stiffly, the only movement the binding allowed him. "What are you?" Adana demanded. "Not a man, clearly, not a snake, something between—" A bitter laugh escaped Chima's throat, the sound dry and rasping. "Names. You humans are obsessed with naming things you can't understand. Snake man, serpent carrier, night feeder. I've been called many things across the centuries." "Pick one," Adana instructed coldly. "Snake man will do," he replied, his voice dripping with contempt. "Simple enough for your human understanding. And how long have you existed, Snake Man? How many women have you killed to feed your hunger?" Chima's eyes took on a distant quality, as if looking back across vast stretches of time. "Longer than this village has stood. Longer than the kingdom has ruled these lands. As for how many..." A smile touched his lips, cruel and prideful. "Hundreds, thousands perhaps. One loses count after the first few centuries." The casualness with which he spoke of so much death chilled Adana to her core. This was no human killer who might feel remorse, who might be rehabilitated. This was something ancient and predatory, to whom human life meant nothing more than sustenance. "Why women?" she asked, the question that had burned in her mind since Nkem's death. "Why always young, beautiful women?" "Because they taste better," Chima replied simply. "Their fear is sweeter, their life force more vibrant. Men are bitter, tough, like stringy meat compared to tender flesh." He licked his lips, the gesture obscene in its hunger. "And the beautiful ones, the special ones with talents or strengths that set them apart, they feed me best of all. Their uniqueness adds flavor to the feast." Adana thought of Nkem, of her beautiful singing voice that had brought joy to everyone who heard it, of Obioma here in Ukoja, found dead after Adana's arrival, of all the women across countless villages who had died to satisfy this creature's hunger. "No more," she said, her voice like steel. "You will kill no more women, Chima. Your hunting days are over." He laughed again, the sound holding genuine amusement despite his situation. Bold words from a human with a bone flute. "You can't maintain that melody forever, Adana. Eventually you'll tire, you'll make a mistake, your concentration will lapse, and when it does..." The threat hung unfinished between them, but its meaning was clear. The moment the flute's magic weakened, he would transform fully and kill her without hesitation. "You're right," Adana acknowledged calmly. "I can't play forever." She brought the flute back to her lips, but instead of resuming the constraining melody, she played a different sequence of notes, higher, sharper, calling rather than binding. Confusion flickered across Chima's face, quickly replaced by alarm as he realized what she was doing. "Stop!" he commanded, genuine fear in his voice for the first time. "That song, you don't know what you're doing." But Adana continued playing, the summoning melody growing stronger, more insistent. And then, movement caught her eye, not from Chima, who remained bound by the lingering effects of the first melody, but from within his own body. A shape was stirring beneath his tunic, a sinuous form awakening despite its master's control. The snake that was part of Chima, yet separate. The deadly serpent that emerged during his feeding was responding to Adana's call, independent of Chima's will. No exclamation mark. Chima gasped, his face contorted with effort as he tried to prevent what was happening. "It obeys only me, only my whistle." Adana played on, her eyes never leaving the bulge moving beneath Chima's tunic, working its way upward as if climbing his body from within. When it reached his waist, she saw the fabric shift and stretch as something pushed against it from inside. Then, with a ripping sound, the snake emerged, its head breaking through the wrapper, its black scales gleaming in the dim starlight. It was larger than Adana had expected, its body as thick as her wrist, its eyes like polished jet beads that reflected no light. For a moment it swayed there, its head weaving back and forth as if confused by the competing commands it was receiving. Chima's silent desperation versus Adana's compelling melody. Then, slowly but deliberately, it began to uncoil itself from around Chima's body, slithering completely free of his clothing to drop to the ground beside him. Adana continued playing, guiding the serpent with her music as surely as a piper guides a snake from a basket. The snake moved toward her, its movement smooth and purposeful. Chima's face contorted with fury and disbelief as he watched his weapon, his feeding tool, respond to another's command. "Impossible!" he snarled. "It is part of me, my essence, my power." When the snake had reached the midpoint between them, Adana changed the melody again, not binding, not summoning, but commanding. The notes took on a martial quality, sharp and authoritative. The snake paused, its head raised as if listening intently. Then, with startling speed, it turned and shot toward Chima. Before he could react, before he could even cry out, the serpent struck, its fangs sinking deep into his neck at precisely the same spot where all his victims had been bitten. Chima jerked violently within his invisible bonds, a strangled noise escaping his throat as the venom entered his bloodstream. The snake withdrew, slithering back to coil at Adana's feet like an obedient pet. She continued playing, but softer now, a melody of soothing and reward rather than command. Chima stared at her, shock and disbelief warring with the growing effects of the venom. "How?" he whispered, his voice already weakening. "How did you turn it against me?" Adana lowered the flute, knowing he was no longer a threat. The venom would work quickly, especially on him, who was connected to the snake, in ways she couldn't fully understand. The oracle taught me more than just the binding melody, she explained, watching as Chima's body began to tremble with the venom's effects. She taught me that your power could be turned against you, that the snake answers to the strongest will, not necessarily to its master. All it took was the right notes, played with absolute conviction. Chima sank to his knees, no longer held upright by the flute's magic, but by his own failing strength. All these centuries, he murmured, more to himself than to Adana. All these women, all these villages, to be ended by a human girl with a bone whistle. Not just a girl, Adana corrected him. A friend seeking justice, a hunter who learned her prey's weakness. The venom was working rapidly now. Chima's breathing became labored, his limbs twitching with involuntary spasms. But even as his body failed, his eyes remained fixed on Adana. Ancient eyes that had seen centuries come and go, that had watched countless women die in fear. "Remember my friend Nkem when you enter the darkness," Adana told him, her voice steady despite the enormity of what was happening. "Remember Obioma and all the others whose lives you stole. Their spirits await you in the world beyond, and I do not think they will be merciful." A last, rattling breath escaped Chima's lips. Then he collapsed fully, his body twitching once, twice, before going still. The snake man was dead, killed by his own serpent at the command of a woman he had intended to make his next victim. Adana stood motionless for a long moment, watching to ensure Chima truly was dead, and not merely feigning. When she was certain, she knelt beside the snake that still waited obediently at her feet. "Your master is gone," she told it softly. "You are free now, free from his control, free from his hunger." She played a final melody on the flute, a releasing, a dismissal. The snake raised its head as if in acknowledgement, then slithered away into the undergrowth surrounding the old shrine, disappearing as completely as if it had never existed. Adana rose, a bone-deep weariness suddenly washing over her. It was done. Nkem was avenged. The women of Ukoja would be safe from the snake man's hunger. Justice had been served in the only way possible for a creature beyond human law. Taking the flute from her lips, Adana looked down at Chima's body. Even in death, he was beautiful. The perfect features, the strong limbs, the appearance of humanity that had disguised the monster within for so long. "In the morning, they will find you in the village square," she told the corpse, "arranged carefully as you arranged your victims, and beside you will be the snake, its head severed, a warning and an explanation combined." She bent and, with strength born of determination rather than physical power, lifted Chima's body across her shoulders. The snake she would retrieve later, once she had positioned Chima in the very center of Ukoja's village square, a final message to the community that had unknowingly harbored a predator in their midst. The night was deep around her as Adana began the walk back to the village, carrying her burden of justice and death. Tomorrow would bring questions, explanations, perhaps even celebrations. But tonight was for completing what she had begun when she first learned of Nkem's death. The hunt for the snake man, the bringer of justice, the turning of the predator's weapon against itself. As she walked, Adana whispered a prayer to the spirits of all the women who had died at Chima's hands. "Be at peace," she told them. "The snake will feed no more." Long before Adana ever set foot in Ukoja, her heart had been shattered by loss. The memory of that day remained sharp in her mind, every detail preserved by grief and the determination that had followed. She had been grinding cassava when the news came. The familiar rhythm of the pestle in her hands, the steady thump, thump, thump that usually calmed her thoughts, had been interrupted by screams from the village square. She'd abandoned her task immediately, running toward the commotion with her heart already knowing what she would find. A crowd had gathered, people standing in a circle, their faces masks of horror and disbelief. When they saw Adana approaching, they parted silently, creating a path that led to the center of their circle. And there was Nkem, her dearest friend since childhood, lying on the ground as if asleep. Her wrapper was arranged neatly around her, her hands placed carefully at her sides, her eyes closed. She might have been resting after a long day's work, except for the unnatural stillness of her chest and the twin puncture marks on her neck, already darkening against her cooling skin. "No," Adana had whispered, falling to her knees beside her friend. "No, no, no." The village healer was already there, examining the wounds with trembling fingers. "Snake bite," he had pronounced, though his voice held uncertainty. "But not like any snake bite I have seen before." "When?" Adana had asked, her voice breaking. "When did this happen? Who found her?" "She was discovered at dawn," someone explained. No one saw or heard anything during the night. Adana had sat beside her friend's body until they took her away for burial preparation, her mind numb with shock. Nkem, who just yesterday had been laughing and singing as they collected firewood together. Nkem, who had recently been glowing with secret happiness, her eyes bright with the excitement of new love. The new man, Adana had suddenly remembered, looking up at the village elders who stood nearby. Nkem told me she was seeing someone, a stranger to our village. "Where is he? Has anyone asked him about this?" The elders exchanged glances. "What man?" one had asked. "Nkem wasn't formally courting anyone." "She didn't give me his name," Adana had admitted, rising to her feet. "But she described him tall, extraordinarily handsome, with a way of speaking that made her feel special. She said he was helping with the new granary construction." A search of the village had confirmed what Adana already suspected. The mysterious stranger was nowhere to be found. He had disappeared as suddenly as he had arrived a month earlier, leaving behind only whispers and 3 dead young women. In the days that followed, as Adana moved through the rituals of mourning, her grief had gradually hardened into determination. This was no ordinary snake that had killed her friend. The pattern was too specific. 3 young women, all found, arranged as if sleeping, all with the same strange bite marks. No ordinary snake killed so selectively, arranged its victims so carefully, or disappeared so conveniently when suspicions arose. 2 weeks after Nkem's burial, Adana had made her way to the hut of the oldest woman in their village, Ezina, the oracle who lived alone at the forest's edge. Known for her wisdom and her connection to the spirit world, Ezina rarely received visitors, preferring solitude to the company of the village. But if anyone knew what kind of evil had taken Nkem, it would be her. Ezina's hut had been dark and thick with the scent of herbs and incense. The old woman herself seemed barely substantial, her body so thin that light seemed to pass through her, her white hair a cloud around her lined face. But her eyes were sharp and clear, seeing far more than what was physically present. "I have been expecting you, daughter of Ekwenzi," she had said, her voice surprisingly strong for one who looked so frail. "You seek answers about your friend's death." "Yes," Adana had confirmed, sitting cross-legged on the mat Ezina indicated. "I believe something evil came to our village, something that only appeared to be a man." Ezini had nodded slowly, as if Adana's words confirmed what she already knew. "Not all dangers in this world announce themselves as dangers," she had said cryptically. "Some wear beauty as a mask, charm as a weapon." "The stranger who came to our village?" Adana had pressed. "The one who disappeared after the 3rd death. What was he?" What killed my friend? Instead of answering directly, Ezine had reached into a small leather pouch and scattered what looked like small bones onto the mat between them. She studied their arrangement for a long moment, her gnarled finger tracing patterns only she could see. "There are creatures in this world," she had finally said, her voice lowering, "who exist between what we know and what we fear. Neither fully human nor fully animal, but something that walks in both worlds." She had looked up then, fixing Adana with those penetrating eyes. "The man your friend spoke of was one such creature, a snake man, whose manhood transforms to deliver death instead of life." Adana had felt a chill run through her at these words, her mind recoiling from an image too terrible to fully comprehend. "How is that possible?" "The old stories speak of a man who made a terrible bargain with a snake deity," Ezine had explained, her hands moving over the scattered bones as if reading a text. "In exchange for beauty that would never fade, charm that could not be resisted, and life that would continue for centuries. He allowed his manhood to become home to a deadly serpent. The snake feeds on the life force of young women, taking it through a bite that mimics passion but delivers death. And this thing, killed Nkem? Killed the others?" Swing Adana had asked, her voice shaking with horror and rage. "Yes," Ezine had confirmed. "He has killed across many villages, many generations. He stays until suspicion grows too strong, then moves to another place where his face is unknown, his charm fresh, his hunting ground unprotected." "How can he be stopped?" Adana had demanded, her hands clenching into fists. "How can such a monster be killed?" Ezine had studied her for a long moment, as if assessing her worthiness for the knowledge she held. Then, apparently satisfied with what she saw, she had risen and moved to a small chest in the corner of her hut. From it, she had withdrawn two objects, a small flute carved from what looked like bone, and a pendant of the same material. "The snake man controls his serpent through a specific whistle," she had explained, returning to the mat. "A melody as old as his curse, passed down through generations of his kind, but the same whistle that calls forth the snake can be countered by this." She had held out the flute, its surface covered in symbols Adana didn't recognize. "Carved from the bone of a sacred python that lived 100 years. The notes it produces can bind the snake, prevent it from answering its master's call, and with the right melody, it can even turn the serpent against the one who commands it." Adana had reached for the flute, but Ezine had held it back. "This knowledge is dangerous, daughter of Ekwensi. To hunt the snake man is to put yourself in his path, to make yourself his target. Are you prepared for what that means?" Without hesitation, Adana had nodded. "Nkem was my sister, in all but blood. If this creature still lives, still hunts, then other women will suffer as she did. I cannot allow that." "Then listen carefully," Ezine had said, finally placing the flute in Adana's hands. "I will teach you the melodies, one to bind, one to summon, one to command. You must practice until your lips bleed, until the notes come without thought, until your will flows through the flute as if it were part of your own body." For weeks, Adana had trained with Ezine, learning not just the melodies, but also how to track the snake man, how to recognize signs of his presence, how to protect herself from his charm. The pendant, Ezine explained, would help shield her from his hypnotic influence, allowing her to see him clearly when others were blinded by his beauty. When her training was complete, Adana had begun her hunt, following rumors of a handsome stranger who had appeared in villages east of Abanta. Each place she visited told the same story, a charming, skilled man who had won everyone's trust, followed by the mysterious deaths of young women, followed by the man's sudden disappearance. The trail had led her finally to Ukoja, where her father's sister lived. When she first saw Chima in the village, she had known immediately that her hunt was over. Everything about him matched Nkem's description, matched what Ezinne had told her to look for. The beauty too perfect to be natural, the charm that affected everyone around him, the way women looked at him, drawn despite the fear that gripped their village. And now, after months of tracking, of planning, of waiting for the right moment, Adana had finally achieved justice for her friend. Chima was dead, killed by his own serpent. His reign of terror ended at last. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, Adana completed her task. Chima's body lay in the center of Ukoja's village square, arranged carefully just as his victims had been. Beside him, she had placed the snake, its head severed from its body, a clear sign to all who found them that the mysterious killer had been identified and dealt with. Her work done, Adana returned to Naoma's compound, bone-weary but at peace for the first time since Nkem's death. Justice had been served. The hunt was over. The village of Ukoja awoke to a sight both shocking and strangely liberating. As the early risers made their way to the well or to the fields, they discovered the tableau Adana had arranged in the square. Chima's body lying peacefully as if asleep, the severed snake beside him telling a story more eloquent than words. Word spread quickly through the village. "Come see! Come see!" children called, running from compound to compound. "Chima is dead. There is a snake!" Soon, a crowd had gathered, their faces showing a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning understanding. The snake's presence, its proximity to Chima's body, connected dots that had been scattered before them for months, but which no one had been able to link together. "It was him," someone whispered, the words spreading through the gathering like fire through dry grass. "Chima was the killer." "Impossible," another contested. "He was here when the first deaths occurred. He helped organize the night patrols." "Look at the snake," an elder pointed out. "Have you ever seen one like it?" "That is no ordinary serpent." As the debate grew, Chief Obi arrived, pushing through the crowd to see for himself what had caused such commotion. He stood silently for a long moment, looking down at the body of the man who had been his trusted advisor and friend for years. At the snake, whose severed head faced Chima, as if in accusation. "Bring the diviner," he finally commanded, his voice heavy with the weight of authority and personal grief. "No one touches them until she has seen this." The village diviner, an old woman almost as ancient as Naoma, arrived leaning heavily on a walking stick. She circled the bodies slowly, muttering to herself, occasionally stopping to peer more closely at some detail others might have missed. "It is as I feared," she announced at last, straightening as much as her bent back would allow. "Not a natural snake, but one that lived within him, a cursed creature, neither fully human nor fully animal." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Women clutched their children closer. Men exchanged looks of horror and disbelief. "Are you saying Chima was the one who killed our daughters?" Chief Obi asked, needing to hear the accusation spoken directly. The diviner nodded solemnly. "The signs are clear. The snake that bit our women came from him. It was part of him, responding to his commands." As this terrible truth settled over the gathering, a new question arose. But who killed Chima? Who cut off the snake's head? At that moment, Adana stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, where she had been watching silently. All eyes turned to her as she moved to stand beside Chief Obi. "I did," she stated, her voice clear and steady. "I killed the snake man who murdered not only 6 women of Ukoja, but also my friend Nkem and 2 others in my village of Abanta." A hush fell over the square. Even the birds seemed to hold their songs as everyone stared at this stranger who claimed to have ended the terror that had plagued them for so long. "Explain yourself," Chief Obi demanded, though his tone held more confusion than anger. "I came to Ukoja not only to visit my aunt Naoma," Adana began, looking around at the gathered villagers, making eye contact with those who had been kind to her during her stay. "I came hunting the creature who killed my friend. I followed his trail from village to village, learning his patterns, understanding his nature." She reached into her wrapper and pulled out the bone flute, holding it up for all to see. "With the help of an oracle in Abanta, I obtained this flute carved from sacred python bone. It gave me power over the snake that lived within Chima, allowing me to turn it against its master." Skeptical murmurs mixed with sounds of awe. Chief Obi raised his hand for silence. "These are extraordinary claims," he said, studying Adana with new eyes. "Why did you not come to me with your suspicions? Why take such action alone?" "Would you have believed me?" Adana countered respectfully but firmly. "If I had come to you and said your trusted builder, the man everyone in Ukoja admired, was actually a monster whose manhood transformed into a deadly snake, that he had lived for centuries, feeding on the life force of young women across countless villages?" The chief's silence was answer enough. Even now, with the evidence before him, the truth was almost too fantastical to accept. "I did what was necessary," Adana continued. "I lured him to the old shrine last night, played the flute that controlled his serpent, and commanded it to turn on its master. The snake that had killed so many women finally delivered justice by killing the one who controlled it." For a long moment, no one spoke. The village seemed to be collectively processing this revelation, adjusting their understanding of the man they had known and trusted for years. Then, from the back of the crowd, a woman's voice called out, "Thank you!" The simple words carried such emotion that they broke the spell of silence. Suddenly, others joined in. "You saved our daughters. Bless you, woman of Abanta. The snake man is dead." Relief and gratitude spread through the gathering like a cleansing wave. Women who had lived in fear for months now wept openly, embracing each other. Men who had felt helpless to protect their families stood taller, as if a great weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Chief Obi raised his hands again, calling for order. When the crowd quieted, he turned to Adana, his face solemn, but his eyes showing a mixture of gratitude and residual doubt. "If what you say is true, Ukoja owes you a debt we can never repay," he said formally. "You have ended a terror that we could not even properly name." "I sought only justice," Adana replied simply, "for my friend Ankem, and for all the women who died at his hands." The chief nodded, then addressed the gathered villagers. "Chima's body will be burned beyond the village boundaries, not buried as is our custom. The snake will be burned with him. Both are cursed and must not remain in our soil." He turned to the elders who stood nearby. "Prepare the pyre. We will cleanse our village of this evil before the sun reaches its highest point." As the crowd began to disperse, many approached Adana, touching her hands or wrapper, as if to assure themselves she was real, thanking her through tears or simple nods of gratitude. Women who had lost daughters hugged her fiercely. Men who had participated in the fruitless night patrols bowed their heads in respect. Through it all, Adana remained composed, accepting their gratitude with quiet dignity. This was not about glory or recognition. It was about justice served, about preventing other women from suffering in Kem's fate. When most of the villagers had returned to their compounds to spread the news or to begin their delayed daily tasks, Naoma approached her niece, pride evident in her lined face. "You have done what no one else could. the old woman said softly. "You have freed Ukoja from a darkness it did not even fully understand." "We freed it together," Adana corrected her. "Your knowledge, your support made this possible." Naom shook her head. "I merely provided shelter and counsel. The courage, the determination, those were yours alone." As they walked back to Naom's compound, leaving others to prepare Chima's body for burning, Adana felt a sense of completion, of a circle closed. Nkem had been avenged. The snake man would kill no more. Her hunt had ended in the justice she had sought for so many months. Yet mixed with this satisfaction was a strange emptiness, a question of what would come next. For so long, her every thought and action had been directed toward finding and stopping Chima. Now that the task was complete, what would fill the space it had occupied in her heart and mind? "You're wondering what happens now?" Naom observed perceptively as they entered her compound. Adana smiled faintly. "Am I so easy to read?" "Only to eyes that have seen many lives unfold," her aunt replied. "The completion of a great purpose always leaves a void. The question is, what will you fill it with?" It was a question Adana wasn't ready to answer yet. For now, it was enough that the hunt was over, that justice had been served, that the snake would feed no more. Later that day, as black smoke rose from the pyre beyond the village boundaries, Chima and his serpent returning to the elements from which they had come. Adana stood with the women of Ukoja, watching the cleansing fire do its work. Among them was Amara, a young woman who had lost her closest friend to the snake man's hunger. "How did you know?" Amara asked quietly, her eyes fixed on the rising smoke. "How did you see what none of us could see?" "Sometimes it takes an outsider's eyes to spot what has become invisible through familiarity," Adana replied. "You saw Chima every day, knew him as a trusted member of your community. I saw him only as he truly was, a predator wearing human skin." Amara nodded slowly, processing this wisdom. "Will you teach me?" she asked suddenly, turning to face Adana directly. "Teach me to see what others miss, to protect rather than be protected." The request surprised Adana, but as she studied the young woman's determined face, she recognized something of herself in Amara's eyes, a strength, a clarity of purpose that set her apart from others her age. "Some lessons cannot be taught quickly," she cautioned. "The knowledge I carry is dangerous as well as powerful." "I understand," Amara replied without hesitation. "But after seeing what happened to my friend, after learning what lived among us for so long, I never want to be blind again. I never want any village to suffer as Ukoja has suffered." In that moment, Adana saw a possible answer to the question of what might fill the void left by her completed hunt. Not a return to her old life in Abanta, but a new purpose passing on what she had learned, preparing others to recognize and fight the darkness that sometimes wore a beautiful face. "We will speak more of this before I leave," she promised Amara, recognizing that the end of one journey might be the beginning of another. As the smoke from Chima's pyre dissipated into the clear blue sky, the women of Ukoja began to walk back to the village, no longer hunched with fear, no longer looking over their shoulders at every sound. Their steps were lighter, their voices stronger, their faces turned toward a future no longer shadowed by unseen terror. Adana walked among them, a stranger who had become their deliverer, a hunter who had brought justice, a woman who had turned a predator's weapon against itself. The bone flute hung safely at her waist once more, its power dormant but ready if ever needed again. In Ukoja that night, for the first time in months, young women slept peacefully, untroubled by nightmares of snake bites and death. Parents rested, without the gnawing fear that their daughters might be next. The village breathed a collective sigh of relief. like a body finally free of long-carried poison, and Adana, in the quiet of Naoma's hut, whispered a final goodbye to Nkem. "It is done, my friend. Your death has been answered. Your killer will hunt no more. Rest now in the knowledge that your sisters everywhere are safer because you were loved and because you were avenged." Years passed, seasons cycled through their eternal progression, rainy periods yielding to dry intervals, planting times transitioning toward harvest occasions, children growing into adults who had children of their own. The village of Ukoja healed from the terror that had gripped it, though the memory remained a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil sometimes wore the most beautiful faces, that charm could mask the deadliest intentions. Adana had returned to Abanta, carrying with her not just the satisfaction of justice served, but also new purpose, new knowledge, new responsibility. The oracle Ezine, recognizing the wisdom and strength Adana had demonstrated in her hunt for the snake man, began training her more deeply in the ancient knowledge she possessed, the understanding of things that existed between worlds, the recognition of dangers most humans never perceived, the methods of countering such threats when they arose. "What you did in Ukoja was just the beginning," Izina told her as they sat together in the old woman's hut, surrounded by symbols and objects whose power few in the village could comprehend. "There are other dangers in this world besides snake men, other predators that wear human skin while carrying death within them." And so, Adana learned, absorbing knowledge that had been passed down through generations of women with the sight to see beyond ordinary reality. She became Ezine's apprentice, then her partner, and finally, when the old woman passed beyond the veil of death, her successor. But Adana was not the only one to carry forward what had been learned in Ukoja. Amara, true to her word, had sought training as well. For a year she had traveled to Abanta, living with Adana and studying under Ezine's guidance. When she returned to Ukoja, she brought with her not just knowledge, but a bone flute of her own, carved under Ezine's direction, blessed with the power to bind creatures that should not exist among humans. Together, though separated by distance, Adana and Amara maintained a network of vigilance sharing information about strange deaths, unusual visitors, potential threats that ordinary people might miss. Occasionally, when patterns emerged that suggested another predator had begun hunting, they would join forces, tracking and confronting dangers, as Adana had once tracked and confronted Chima. In Ukoja itself, the story of the snake man and the woman who had defeated him became legend, told and retold around evening fires, each generation adding its own embellishments while preserving the essential truth at its core. Mothers used the tale to warn their daughters about being too easily charmed by handsome strangers. "Remember Chima," they would say, "beautiful on the outside, deadly within. Judge a man by his actions, not his words or his face." Young men heard in the story a different lesson about the responsibility that came with attraction, about the sacred trust between men and women, about how true manhood protected rather than preyed upon others. Village elders emphasized yet another aspect of the tale, the danger of accepting outsiders too readily, of being blinded by skill or charm to potential threats, of allowing beauty to override caution. Chima came as a stranger, they reminded listeners. He won our trust with his skills and his smiles. We invited the snake into our midst and called it friend. Each telling shaped the behavior of those who heard it, creating ripples of caution, awareness, and wisdom that spread far beyond Ukoja. Travelers who heard the tale carried it to other villages, other regions, where it blended with similar stories, creating a tapestry of warning that extended across the land. Decades passed. Adana grew older, her black hair gradually yielding to silver, her smooth skin acquiring the dignified lines of age. Yet her eyes remained sharp, her mind clear, her purpose unwavering. From her small compound at the edge of Abanta, she continued to train others who showed the ability to see beyond ordinary perception, to recognize threats that existed between worlds. Among her students were women from many villages, each drawn by dreams or visions, or simply an unexplainable knowing that led them to her door. They came seeking understanding of abilities that had set them apart since childhood, the capacity to sense emotions hidden beneath pleasant words, to see flickering changes in people that others missed, to know when danger approached before any physical sign appeared. Adana taught them what Ezina had taught her, what experience had reinforced through years of hunting creatures that should not exist among humans. She taught them to trust their perceptions while testing them against evidence. She taught them the melodies that could bind, summon, or command entities from beyond ordinary reality. Most importantly, she taught them the responsibility that came with such knowledge, the obligation to protect rather than simply hunt, to preserve balance rather than seek personal power. We are not hunters for the glory of the kill, she would tell each new student. We are guardians of boundaries that most humans never see. We maintain the balance between worlds because we are among the few who can perceive when that balance is disturbed. In Ukoja, Amara followed a similar path, though more quietly, more subtly. As a respected elder in the village where she had lived her entire life, she used her position to watch for signs of the unusual, to investigate deaths or disappearances that carried patterns beyond ordinary explanation, to warn travelers about dangers they might encounter on distant roads. The bone flute Ezina had carved for her hung always at her waist, hidden by her wrapper, but ready if needed. In 30 years, she had used it only twice, once to bind a water spirit that had begun dragging children into the stream that ran past Ukoja, and to command a shapeshifter that had taken the form of a respected trader to gain access to village homes. Both times, Amara had sent word to Adana after the threat was contained, and together they had determined the appropriate response banishment for the water spirit, which was merely following its nature rather than deliberately harmful, death for the shapeshifter, which killed with full awareness and purpose. As for the snake man Chima, no sign of his kind had been seen in any village within traveling distance of either Ukoja or Abanta. Whether he had been the last of his kind, or whether others still existed in distant regions, neither Adana nor Amara could say with certainty. But they remained vigilant, training their students to recognize the specific patterns associated with such creatures. The too-perfect beauty, the charm that affected everyone it touched, the mysterious deaths of young women with twin puncture marks that resembled snake bites. One evening, as the sun set over Abanta, casting long shadows across Adana's compound, a young woman arrived seeking the wise one she had heard about in stories. She was perhaps 16, with bright, intelligent eyes, and a quiet dignity that set her apart from others her age. "My grandmother sent me," she explained when Adana invited her to sit beneath the large tree that shaded the compound. "She said you would understand the dreams that have troubled me since childhood." "Your grandmother's name?" Adana asked, studying the girl with experienced eyes that saw more than most. "Amara of Ukoja," the girl replied, straightening with evident pride. "She says you and she once hunted together, though she will not speak of what you hunted or why." Adana smiled, memories of her old friend and fellow guardian warming her heart. Amara is wise in her silence. Some knowledge is earned, not given freely. But if she sent you, then she sees in you what I begin to see, the sight that looks beyond ordinary seeing, the awareness that senses what others miss. The girl nodded eagerly. The dreams show me dangers before they come. People whose faces shift when they think no one is looking. Shadows that move against the light rather than with it. Grandmother says these are not merely dreams, but glimpses of what truly exists in the world, hidden from most eyes. Your grandmother speaks truth, Adana confirmed. Tell me, child, what is your name? Nkem, the girl replied, after a friend my grandmother once had, who died before I was born. For a moment, Adana was silent, struck by the cycle of life and death, of endings and beginnings that this name represented. Nkem, her friend whose death had set her on the path that defined her life's purpose. And now, decades later, a new Nkem arriving to carry forward the knowledge that had grown from that tragedy. Nkem is a good name, she said finally, her voice soft with memory and hope. A strong name, a name with purpose. The girl waited expectantly, sensing the importance of this moment, though not yet understanding its full significance. If you are willing to learn, I am willing to teach, Adana told her. But the path is not easy. The knowledge I offer brings responsibility that will sometimes feel heavier than you can bear. The sight that allows you to recognize dangers also obligates you to confront them when others cannot. Without hesitation, young Nkem nodded. I am ready. The dreams have prepared me, shown me both the beauty and the danger that exist beyond what most people see. I want to understand. I want to help maintain the balance my grandmother speaks of. And so the cycle continued. Knowledge passed from teacher to student. Wisdom earned through experience shared with those who came after. The vigilance of those who could see beyond ordinary reality, protecting those who could not. In villages across the region, the story of the snake man and the woman who had defeated him remained alive, told and retold around evening fires. Some versions emphasized the horror, the creature whose manhood transformed into a deadly serpent, feeding on the life force of young women. Others focused on the courage, the friend who had tracked the killer across villages, who had turned his own weapon against him. All versions carried the same warning, the same wisdom. Not everything beautiful is good. Not every smile hides kindness. Not every attractive stranger deserves trust. In time, the specific names faded from the tale. Chima became simply the handsome stranger, or the snake man. Adana became the brave woman, or the hunter with the bone flute. Even the villages where the events had occurred grew indistinct in the telling, the story becoming universal rather than bound to specific locations. But the essential truth remained intact, passing from generation to generation, a protection against dangers that continued to exist in the world, hidden beneath beautiful faces and charming smiles. Mothers still warned their daughters, "Be careful who you trust." None of them knew his manhood was a snake until it was too late. And daughters listened, carrying the warning in their hearts, as they moved through a world where danger sometimes wore the most attractive disguises, where evil sometimes spoke with the sweetest voice, where death sometimes came from what had appeared to be love. The echoes of what had happened in Ukoja continued to ripple through time, saving lives long after those who had experienced the original events had returned to the earth from which they came. The story lived on, a testament to friendship, to courage, to the power of truth, to overcome deception, to the triumph of justice over evil, no matter how beautifully that evil might be disguised. For in the end, this was the greatest victories, not just that one predator had been stopped, but that his methods had been exposed, his deception revealed, his hunting grounds made hostile through knowledge shared, and warnings heeded. None of them knew his manhood was a snake. But now, because of one woman's courage and determination, because of justice demanded and obtained, because of wisdom passed from generation to generation, they all knew to watch for signs that such creatures might walk among them. And in that knowledge lay protection more powerful than any weapon, more enduring than any single act of heroism. The snake man was dead, but the warning remained.